Thank you, Mohammed. The Roads to Mansur project, in short, RMP, aims to understand the network of routes connecting to the major Iron II site Khurayt al-Mansur. The idea for that project developed out of the lack of knowledge about the connections of the Iron Age II settlements, in particular those ones which are located in the rugged and mountainous area between the highlands and lowlands. The participants of the project are Piotr Biankowski, Mohamed Al-Najjar, Abdallah Al-Rawabde, and myself. And the whole overall idea, of course, developed out of the many discussions with Rocio Dariva and Benedict Hensel. And I'm very pleased to very briefly present you the major ideas and aims of it. Despite the numerous surveys and also some excavations, our archaeological knowledge about Iron Age southern Transjordan remains patchy. We've seen that in the last 2 days. So even if Burden McDonald's systematic surveys have largely superseded earlier, less intensive ones, some areas remain unexplored by systematic surveys. Of the surveyed sites, around 600 have some evidence of Iron Age presence and comprise villages, farms, copper production sites, watchtowers, all sorts of burial sites and campsites. And there are, of course, also a couple of larger settlements. Out of these, only 11 have been excavated if we count the Fenan copper region as only one site. Also, the networks of roads and tracks that connected the sites to each other and to the main trade routes are not clear. In particular, the routes across the more mountainous areas are largely unclear because previous surveys have not systematically covered these regions. The rugged landscapes makes it difficult to carry out research and also excavations. However, this type of landscape comprises a significant proportion of the area of Edom. So regarding the historiography of routes, from the time of Nelson Gluck's pioneering surveys, there has been a long-standing focus on the King's Highway as a traditional main north-south route through Edom. More recently, emphasis has been on tracking the networks of routes between the settlements in both Edom and neighboring areas based on computer applications rather than archaeological surveys. So Aurélie Juvenel in 2003, and I'm happy that she's in the audience, as well as Annelien Dolan and Stephen Edwards in 2020, for example, worked on least cost paths analysis and gravity models and challenged the course of the King's Highway as the only solution of a north-south connection. One of the few intensive surveys that focused on the identification of networks, roads, tracks, and paths descending the cliffs from the highlands to the lowlands of Transjordan, so that means between Fenan, Psera, and Wadi Araba, was carried out by Aras bin Yosef, Mohamed Al-Najjar, and Tom Levy in the framework of the Al-Rab project. And they identified 3 ascents, one through Wadi Ad-Dahal here, the other one through Wadi al-Jaria, and the third one through Wadi Ghwayba. Although none of these Iron Age II routes was paved, the survey identified what might be surviving evidence of Iron Age road construction. This is, for example, retaining walls, as you can see on the right-hand side, boulder alignments in these 2 pictures on the left, stone clearings, switchbacks, and occasional small defensive sites. The team dated the ancient roads primarily based on the dating of the associated sites, the absence of sites from other periods, and also occasional finds on the roads themselves. The methodology of the survey showed that the rugged terrain with steep slope was actually quite suitable to identify ancient roads because artificial constructions were needed and were built to support the pathways. You see that here. And also because the travelers were confined to follow a specific course. So this would be very different in wider wadis, where travelers would have more options of routing, and where we often see these dendrites of routes that eventually lead together or not. So the authors concluded that any Iron Age road construction would have been no more than what we can see today. This work demonstrates that with careful survey technique, archaeological evidence of ancient roads can be found, at least in undeveloped and relatively unpopulated areas, even when they were unpaved. And this is the great chance of the mountainous landscape in southern Transjordan. So building on this recent research and with an eye to filling some of the gaps in the archaeological data, the Roads to Mansur project aims to survey the routes in the mountainous landscape connecting to Khorayet al-Mansur, which is at approximately 1.6 hectare, quite a large mountaintop site. So Khorayet al-Mansur is located in the western part of the perennial Wadi al-Fed, roughly 16 kilometers north of Petra, overlooking Wadi Araba. Wadi al-Fed flows in westerly direction from the top of the plateau in the east to the Araba Valley, and it's roughly 5 kilometers long. Wadi al-Fed has been surveyed, and so the identification and dating of the sites within the wadi is known. It is particularly suitable for this project because it is very narrow, it's undeveloped, unpopulated, and the traces of ancient roads, which were not mapped by the previous surveys, were more likely or are more likely to survive, to be spotted, and to be identified. Khorayet al-Mansur is positioned on the summit of a low ridge in an elevation of roughly 750 meters above sea level. Here you can see the site on the left, and here on the right hand side you have a view from the north, and I'm talking about this ridge. The site is surrounded, as can be seen, by steep escarpments, making it a natural stronghold. In the east, the place is separated from the opposite massif by a natural rift through which the road ascends to the lower course of the Wadi al-Fed. The summit and terraces have dense concentration of dry stone broadroom houses, and there is evidence of a town wall, perhaps a retaining wall, and a single gateway. 90% of the pottery collected on the surface dates to the Iron II. The rest dates to the late Islamic period, according to Ulrich Hübner. The site and its surrounding was surveyed by Hübner between 2001 and 2003. Hübner, on the basis of his surface survey, suggested it was a customs post on the Iron II trade route for copper from Fainan and the Khirbet and Nahaz region, situated about halfway up to the Edomite Plateau. So given the site's remote location, rock topography, and relative inaccessibility, this seems unlikely at the first sight, but the size of the site, the presence of a wall and gateway imply a significant Iron II site, which is likely to have been connected by routes across the rocky landscape, south to Petra, north to Fainan and Pseira, and west to Wadi Araba. It is these roads that the Roads to Mansur project intends to identify, to map, and to date. So the Wadi al-Fed is at the upper and middle course accessible, and from the section west of Khirbet, or from west of Khirbet al-Fed, and this would be this part here of the wadi becomes much more impassable, and west of Khorayet al-Mansur, then the canyon drops over 1,000 meters down to Wadi Araba. It has a series of steep waterfalls and pools which can only be descended by abseiling equipment, which is also offered by a couple of tourism offices here in Jordan. Hübner proposed the course of certain routes from Mansur, one connecting east-west through Wadi al-Fed, and one coming from the northwest from the Wadi Araba. He claimed that these roads were suitable for camel traffic. Another route was proposed from the south, coming from Petra, along the Wadi al-Khudus via Wadi Abu Mahmud, suitable for donkeys. However, both of these wadis are very difficult terrain, and today the use of abseiling equipment, you've seen that, is necessary, at least at some parts. So the nature of the routes used in antiquity, and in particular in the Iron Age, and what sort of traffic they could possibly carry is not clear. The survey of Wadi El Fed was undertaken as part of the Edom Lowlands project by Kyle Knapp, Mohammed El Najjar, and Tom Levy. The team identified sites belonging to the Iron II, but also mapped terraces and other installations, which are of great importance when analyzing the road networks. And furthermore, they noted that roads and trails are common, although the project itself did not attempt to map or date them. However, one road the team reported began near Khirbet El Fed, here the 114, a likely Roman site, but also with Iron II pottery, and ran west over the mountains down into Wadi Araba. It is unclear how accessible this road was and what sort of traffic might have been used. So given the difficulty of exploring this rocky terrain and finding evidence of ancient roads, RMP will try low altitude aerial photography using drones to fly systematically over the wadi. Evidence of likely roads, paths, and tracks will be identified on these photographs and then afterwards followed up by ground survey. The subtle signs of any surviving Iron Age road architecture, such as stone clearings, border alignments, retaining walls, we've seen these examples, are the sort of evidence that is either not visible or not easily spotted on traditional satellite or aerial images commonly used here in Jordan, because these images are very often taken at a too high an altitude. By applying drone technology, an altitude can be reached that is higher than the traditional balloon images, but lower than the aerial images taken from helicopters, for example. The experience of a variety of different projects using drones, also by Tom Levy, showed that the range of 75 to 150 meters is suitable for a site-wide scale. Of course, we need to play around with the elevations and height with this very specific landscape and the very specific questions we have. Another advantage is that drone photographs are flexible, as they can be taken at any precise moment when needed. Also, they are very cheap and within the reach of even modest archaeological budgets. And last but not least, the efficiency is a major benefit, as recordings can be made very quickly in a systematic way, and is an advantage, especially in the inaccessible region of Wadi El Fed. So the project intends to cover the survey area around Khurayt al-Mansur using drones. That means following a pre-programmed flight path by maintaining the altitude best suitable for this territory, and then locating the photographs using GIS. SFM modeling will be used to create three-dimensional models, and it will then be possible to zoom in on key points and to track routes across the landscape. I'm very glad that Abdallah Al-Rawabde will be with us for the technical part. So in November 2020, we were able to perform a little test flight, which we conducted in Wadi al-Jaria, close to Penang, just because this area was much more or better accessible. The aim of that test run was just to check if the images would be precise enough for an identification of possible pathways, even in this rugged landscape, by using conventional photography without LiDAR. And the outcome was positive. We hope to start the project at some point in fall this year. One of the aims of RMP will be to trial the advantages and disadvantages of using drone photography to identify evidence of ancient routes in this rough and rocky landscape. On this basis, a typology of routes, tracks, and paths will be created, and if possible, dates and the type of traffic shall be determined. The overall objective is to understand routes to the major Iron II site Khurayt al-Mansur, about which little is known. Also to map networks of routes through this mountainous landscape and to understand better the nature of communications in this remote and rugged area of Edom, situated midway between the Petra area and Fenan Sera. In the long run, it would be desirable if we have a possible outcome to record the entire region of southern Transjordan, at least the rocky landscape, with this method, and thus to make general conclusions about the connecting routes in this region. Although realistically, it will only work effectively in undeveloped and largely uninhabited areas where such evidence of ancient road still survives. This method would also offer the possibility of comparing Edomite settlements, especially the difficult to access hilltop settlements, since data on their sizes, as well as topography, archaeological surface remains, elevation, and so on and so forth, can be easily generated by these images. Especially in this difficult territory, the use of drone technology is extremely efficient and almost the only way to find out more about this settlement area in the south of Transjordan. I would like to close my presentation with some footage we shot in November 2020. Here you see Khrbet al-Jaria, just for you to have an impression what we could achieve even with a very small drone with our colleague who flew with a license. At some points we are certainly flying too high in altitude, but this is just really for you to have an impression of our very first flight. So without fancy music, it will be roughly 1 minute of silence to enjoy. We are looking here towards north, northeast. And this is certainly too high, but you can still see the details that can be actually seen even at that altitude. And the view back to Wadi Jaria and Khrbet al-Jaria. Thank you very much.